I'm delighted to welcome today the very, very lovely Jackie Booth, who is an executive leadership coach for women. Welcome, Jackie.
Hi, Elaine. Thank you for having me here.
And executive leadership coach, that sounds a bit fancy. That sounds a bit top level. Explain what an executive leadership coach is, please.
Okay, yeah, that's a good question. So I work with women who are in the corporate world who would consider themselves executives, so kind of top management, top directors, that kind of thing. But I also work with women who have their own businesses, so they are the executives of their own businesses. So that's why it's a term that's kind of well known, I think, as kind of, you know, the women that I work with. But I very much, it's focusing on how you lead yourself in whichever role you're in, and lead yourself in your own life.
So how did you get into this?
Oh, I started managing large teams. That's pretty much, I was kind of in that corporate setting myself, and I was actually I've been managing teams probably for about 30 years, or managing people, and then managing teams. And I was managing a lot of teams remotely, so I was working in for a national organisation. I was working regionally, and I had teams in the region and I had teams in London, and I was travelling between the two. And I found that I was using a lot of development and supportive skills, because when you're not sitting alongside somebody, and actually even if you are, a lot of it is them using their own skills, and you're developing them and facilitating their learning and development rather than teaching them everything by showing them how how to do it. And the organisation I worked for supported me to put my toe in the water of coaching. So I did some coach training. I researched and I was able to choose which training I wanted to do, and they supported me financially a little bit to kind of undertake that. And it was such an eye-opener. I absolutely loved it. I thought, this is why I love working with people, because I'm able to kind of bring them on and develop them. And so after I'd been doing the coaching for a little while with my teams, using everything that I'd learned with my teams, I was unfortunately made redundant. So I had a huge stock check. I think that's probably stock take. That's probably the word. And I thought about, actually, what do I really want to do? Where do I want to spend the time? Do I want to get another job exactly the same? I didn't want to take the job that the organisation was offering me. And so, although the redundancy was a really challenging time, it's horrible, that word redundant, isn't it? Kind of no longer useful. You have a real crisis of confidence, because you feel, actually, has everything I've done not been valued? It's awful at the time. And then everywhere that you go, because you go through a consultation period, so there's about 10 weeks where you've kind of got this redundancy looming or something to happen. And I everywhere I went, even just in somewhere like Marks and Spencer's buying a sandwich, I was thinking, everybody's got a job but me. Everybody's got a job, and I'm the one without a job. And I'm the one without a job that I really want to do. So I spent a fair bit of time, thinking about what I wanted to do, and I decided to set up my coaching practice then. So that was about 8 years ago. And that's kind of how I got into coaching. But the things that I've done over the years, managing teams, and supporting staff and developing staff, have all been part of skills that I've learned, that I've transferred into coaching. So that's kind of how it all started, really.
It's interesting that I often say this to people, that nothing is ever wasted, is it? All of the skills, the experience, the knowledge that we gain anywhere in our life is always useful somewhere along. And so many people kind of live in a box thinking, oh, well, I haven't got a job now, but what else can I do, because I've only ever done this job? Well, the skills that you've learned in that job, whatever it is, are transferable. But a lot of people don't even realise they're in a box, never mind climb out of the box, and with these other phrases that we hear. So it's great that you're using your experience, as have many coaches, to then help other people.
Thank you.
The other thing you were saying about redundancy, I I have only ever worked for 12 years in corporate. My whole life I've had my own businesses in one shape or another, but in the 12 years I was in corporate, and 20 plus years I've mentored other businesses and in leadership and teams and so on. The redundant word has come up again and again, and I've had to make people redundant as part of projects, and I've had to build people up from being redundant and everything in between. But very, very often what comes up is people thank me because if they hadn't been made redundant, obviously I was doing it on behalf of the client that I was working with, they would not have had the gumption, the balls, whatever, the strength to stand up and do something that they'd always wanted to do. So that I've got more stories of happiness following redundancy than misery, but it is a shocking period, and it's a shock to system, and it also affects people's health, doesn't it? Because when you're when you're given that, it's like having a horrible diagnosis in health. You're given that diagnosis, shock, horror, disbelief, anger, rage, misery, depression, etc. It's similar, isn't it? It's a form of bereavement.
Yes, yeah, that's exactly true, because you're very much grieving for the life that you were living, that you were obviously okay with, but you're also grieving for what you thought your future was going to be. So there's a loss in the kind of perception of how you're going to be, and also the perception of you and your place in the world, and your usefulness and value is very much tied up in kind of our occupation, isn't it, really? And you're right, I found that although that was one of the worst times career-wise, it turned out to be the best. It really turned out to be the best time. I learned a lot about myself and about my own resilience, but also around sitting down and thinking, actually this is an opportunity. This isn't something that's great. This is something that has happened. You're going to have to deal with it, and it's an opportunity. So often just changing your perception and looking at something from a different, in a different viewpoint, makes you think about, okay, so what's possible? Like you say, it's kind of like you were in this box and the walls have gone, so you can see a lot more clearly. And that's a lot of just what I do with clients. Let's take you out of the box and let's look for a clear horizon, because actually there's a lot more possible. And a lot of what I did was I had a coach at the time, but I sat down and worked out those things that were so important to me to have in the workplace, whatever that workplace looks like, being able to kind of support and help others, being able to have a challenge, having a work ethic, be part of a team or a community, so it's kind of thinking about those things that are really important to you. And I've coached women through redundancy, and they often feel that they need to kind of, almost like a hermit crab, come from one box and fit themselves straight back into another. And I'm very much, actually, no, what do you need? What would be fulfilling for you to have in the workplace? What do you need? Let's look for something that's going to fit you, rather than looking at a job thinking, oh, I can just about squeeze myself into that, I can do so much of that job. Because that's often what happens. We feel that we need to squeeze ourselves to fit into a shape that somebody else has created, rather than creating our own space and our own shape. So yeah, it turned out to be the best thing. It was a challenging time though, because within 6 months of me being made redundant and setting up my own business, I'd been married at the time for about 24 years, and my marriage ended. So that was also, I was grieving that then for quite some time as I was building my coaching practice. So in a way, it was very much a trial by fire time. When I look back at that time, I'm thinking, okay, I only got better after all that happened.
And you're a mother as well, aren't you?
Yes, yeah, I am. My daughter is now 30, so very much independent, and kind of. But at the time we separated, she was 24, and she was doing an internship actually, and then eventually she came back home for a little bit of time, which was brilliant. Actually, it was lovely having her home when I'd separated, because it obviously wasn't a great time for her. However old you are when your parents separate. So yeah, it was a great time for us to kind of build our relationship. or not build, but kind of look at our relationship as adults, you know, because so often with your children that you're kind of in that parent role. But she came back, she'd been to university, she'd done an internship in London, and you know, she came back for probably about year and a half, maybe 2 years before she then moved in with a boyfriend. And yeah, it was great because the dynamics had shifted. Her dad wasn't in the house, it was just me and her. It was really great actually, and it gave me an insight into kind of, you know, what young women you know, are looking for and how they're starting to lead themselves. You know, I mean, I mainly work with women that are sort of in their mid-30s up to their sort of mid-40s, mid-50s, that when I coach. But you know, when I've worked and done other contracting things, you've gone into businesses where they're young women, it's good to kind of get that perspective and then share it with her and say, well, this is what other people are experiencing. And yeah, that's exactly what it's like for young women, because it's very different when you're in your 20s. When you think back to who you were in your 20s, it's very different than when you get, you know, into sort of your late 40s, early 50s.
Well, I'm in my 60s now, and my daughter is approaching 40. So I'm watching kind of my life all over again, and unfortunately, you know, I'm seeing this similar kind of things that I was doing, she's doing, and you know, they know better, don't they? And you can't complain on one hand to, you know, bring them up as confident beings, and then moan when they are confident. And you know, it's difficult, isn't it? So your experience as a mother, as a divorcee, as leading teams, and an all-round good egg has stood you in good stead for your coaching practice.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, like you say, no skills are ever wasted. You know, I mean, there's skills that you don't even realise you have of kind of when you raise children. And even though it was only the one, but also, you know, kind of running a family. I mean, back when my daughter was very small, my first career was as a nurse, and I worked for many years in palliative and end of life care in the community. And you know, I was doing that when she was very small, so I was kind of managing that career and studying. I studied for a degree at that time, and she was at school, so you're doing all the school run, the lunch boxes, all the kind of, you know, what does she need for sports day, whose friend's house is she going to, goodness, does she need a birthday present, oh, and then there's the dentist, you know, all that emotional load that you kind of hold in a home. And you know, kind of doing all that, as well as, you know, my nursing and what I was doing that. And then I went into managing a large team of nurses after I'd kind of finished the nursing when she was about 12 or 11 or 12, something like that, and she was at secondary school. And it was only really, like you say, when I came to be managing a lot bigger teams and then my coaching, that I just thought, yeah, I have so many skills here that just come into everything. You know, I mean, the most important part of you as a coach and how far and how, you know, how you support your clients is you as a tool. So the more that you kind of have under your, you know, kind of umbrella of skills and experience, the better that you can, you know, help your clients. So yeah, I do love that phrase actually, no skill is ever wasted. I might be borrowing that.
Feel free. The other R word you mentioned is resilience. We talked about redundancy just now, but resilience, or bounce back, is a new phrase that we're hearing constantly these days, where when I was younger, we, you know, it never came in the vocabulary at all, but resilience and bouncing back. And there's so many, it's almost like young people now are kind of on a pinball machine. You know, they bounce around from this to that, to this to that, through no fault of their own, but they are guided, what do you call it, peer pressure they receive and so on, from so many different sources, you know, social media and the mainstream media and so on and so forth. So finding who you are as soon as possible helps out, doesn't it? And I found, I'm sure you've found the same, it is, you alluded to the age of the women that you coach. I found in mid-30s is a time where people start to realise who they are, and that they don't have to keep pushing and proving. You know, all you need to do is to know yourself. When you know yourself and you're grounded, you can deal with anything. You know, you then become resilient almost overnight.
Yeah, that's very true, and you're right. I mean, I suppose that's kind of, in a way, that's why I coach the women at that age, because that's when I made my change and kind of hung my nurse's uniform up for good when I was in my kind of mid-30s. That's when I made the change to move into management and use all the skills I had. But you're so right around knowing yourself. I mean, when I'm with the clients, and it's the first thing I start on. Let's work out who you are, and what's important to you. And I think the other thing around resilience is trusting yourself, because you're right, there is so much social media, there is so much peer pressure, this whole comparisonitis thing that we all get. You look on Instagram and you think, oh, that's really nice how they've done that. You think, why aren't mine like that? And then you think, well, no, mine are me. So yeah, it's trusting yourself, and having that belief in yourself that you are doing the right thing. And for me, a lot of that is actually trusting your gut instinct. Often people and friends say, well, actually, they may come out of a situation or out of a relationship or out of a job, and they just think, there was something I couldn't quite put my finger on, it wasn't quite right, but I didn't know enough about what it was, and I wasn't able to interpret what it was, but it was a gut feeling. And that's, listen to that, because that will never lead you wrong. There's always something in what you do that is aligned with kind of who you are. So things that you value. So, for example, one of the things that I value very highly is respect. So if people are rude to me, or not so much cutting me up in traffic, but if people are rude or arrogant, I kind of feel I'd take a little bit of a step back, thinking, oh, I don't like that. That doesn't make me feel comfortable, because I don't like that. Because respect, for me, and it might just be somebody disrespecting your time and being late, because you think, oh, hang on a minute, that's and it's not a huge thing, but these little things add up, so they give you that overwhelming underlying actually niggle about a person or a situation, and you think, oh, why is that? And that's that's the beauty of when you get to know yourself. You think, right, okay, I'm reacting like that, I'm feeling like that, because this is how they are, because this is who I am, and there's no right or wrong. It's just being aware of, okay, I do this because this is what's important to me, and trusting in that. It's the hardest thing to learn to do, to trust yourself, but I think we were probably all doing it when we were children. We just don't realise, and we weren't always encouraged. Often depending on the parents you had, they know best. So even though you don't feel comfortable with it, you're kind of forced to do it anyway. So yeah, it's trusting, it's learning to trust yourself from a young age, if that's possible to do, and it's not always for all of us.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned about following your intuition, and your gut feeling. That is so important, whether it's from an intellectual point of view or a physical point of view, because so often, how often do we look back and go, oh, I should have done this, or I should have said that, and I knew so innately, in your being, but then the head gets in the way, and you start bringing the monkey chatter in, and talk yourself out of different things, and then you go, oh, if only I'd blah blah, whatever it was.
Yes.
And I find that all the time with health. People who have put their head in their sand, they've not listened to their body, they've not taken any notice of niggles or rashes or whatever it is, and then lo and behold, they get a horrendous diagnosis, and then they expect to press a button, pop a pill, whatever it is, and get better overnight, when their whole life has led to this situation, not just the last 5 minutes that whatever the doctors told them. So it goes through our whole life, whether it's our career, our personal relationships, our health. Listening to us, that we are the experts, aren't we? We are the experts on our own body, we are the experts on our own mind, on our intuition and so on, but we get in our own way. Why is that?
Really good question. I think a lot of it is the beliefs that we have, and that we're like you say, the monkey chatter that we get exposed to as children, actually, and in fact, almost if you have siblings, it happens even before you go to school. So you're compared often against your siblings, well, you're good at this and you're good at that, so you're put in boxes almost from the beginning. And then when you go to school, it's even worse. You're compared immediately. You're at school, you're good at this, and I was always told you're no good at maths. So you know, I went through the whole of, I mean, I'm not brilliant at it, but I can add up, I can check the change, you know. You know, you go through school with this label of not being great at maths, and everybody else believes it, and it's a story that you start to believe about yourself, and then you do add it up in your head and you think, no, I've done that, I've worked that out, and somebody's arguing with you and you think, oh no, I'm going to back down because I'm no good at maths, you know. So it's kind of these stories that we hear as children, and I think as women, I mean, one of my stories was always, you know, I was never the angel in the nativity. I was never, there was always some cute little blonde kid that could have the tinsel halo on that was never me, and I was always going to be stuck at the back with a shepherd with a tea towel on my head, you know, when I was about 7, and I really didn't want to do that. And we compared against each other from a young age, and this is often where our monkey chatter comes from, because we remember the negatives, you know. I mean, although I'm kind of not hung up on the fact that I wasn't the angel in the nativity, it was always a little bit of like, as you're a teenager and you then do compare. I mean, I was a teenager in the 80s, so it was very much kind of like, you know, just 17 and smash hits and that kind of thing. You know, it's not the social media that teenagers have now, which it can be an absolute nightmare. But again, you're comparing yourself to what you see in the media, what you see on the television, what you see celebrities doing, and you look at yourself, you know, and a negative. And if you've had 1 or 2 comments about saying, oh, you know, you could be prettier here, or you could be this, or you could be that, then you remember the negative, and this is the story that you create yourself, and you carry these messages and this voice and this internal chatter throughout your life, you know, until you start to sit down and till you know, it's one of the things I do when I'm coaching is actually, okay, so what do you believe about yourself, and how much is that is exactly true, you know. So for me, you know, did it ruin my life because I wasn't the angel in the nativity? Actually no, because what I did, I remember what I did was about 7 or 8, or maybe a little bit older, certainly junior school, the teacher was like, you need to go home and put your dressing gown on and get a tea towel. I don't want to do it. I honestly can't do that. I don't want to do that. And I remember feeling, I'm telling the teacher no, and she said, well, what are you going to do? And I went, well, I don't know. I cannot do it. I was almost getting upset. I can't do it. You know, I'm not being, I knew I wasn't being, because I didn't want to be the angel, because the girl that was being the angel, you know, was very pretty and whatever. I didn't want to be, I just didn't want to be a shepherd. I just didn't want to be in that role that this teacher was creating for me. And in the end, I remember she said, well, you're really good at reading out loud. I was called Jacqueline when I was little. You're really good at reading out loud. So you can read a little bit of the narration. And that became my role for probably a couple of nativities, actually. I stood, you know, to one side and I read the story. And I was like, okay, that's fine. I don't have to have a tea towel on me and come to school with a dressing gown on, you know. So it's, again, that's probably where my resilience started to come from. But yeah, it's around believing or not believing the things that people tell you about yourself. And that's hard, you know. Our bosses and our colleagues and our parents, our friends, you know, may not mean to, but we get negative criticism, and we start to create that as part of our story.
Absolutely, and that's why I've created the DISC. I've got my own DISC model of behavioural profiling now on my website, which I'm really excited about, and just about to relaunch as DISC Plus, because I'm linking the DISC with DISC behaviours with the career stuff I've done over the years with team development, team dynamics and psychology and everything, but also with family relationships and with health, because we can predict the health outcomes from somebody's behaviour pattern. And again, working with your top leaders in business, similar to what happened to me, you end up, because you are in a role that you enjoy, hopefully most of your clients are in roles that they enjoy, you're passionate about it, and then you end up burning the candle at both ends, because you have to be you're expected to be a super mother, wife, all the rest of it, homekeeper, executive leader, team person, etc., etc. So you end up putting the hours in, and then because you enjoy it, you blur the lines between work and home, and before you know where you are, as I had in 2009, my first cancer diagnosis, and that comes through stress, through overworking, through lack of sleep. But the whole time you're kidding yourself intellectually, well, I love what I'm doing, it's absolutely fantastic, but then the body gives you messages that you ignore. So it's the whole thing for me is about, you know, whatever you're at the top of, you're leading, it doesn't matter what it's called, you must put yourself in the middle of it all, because without you, you haven't got a team. You don't have, you know, the family will fall to pieces, and this, that, and the other is, you know, that's our beliefs. But the honesty, the resilience, the values, the culture, it all plays a part, doesn't it? It's not just us; it's the whole environment that we're in.
Yeah, definitely. And you're so right about the body making you stop. And I mean, I remember when I got my kind of first big project that I was managing, so probably within a couple of years of me actually, you know, putting the uniform to one side, the first project I managed, I loved it so much. I had such a great team, and I was creating community services that were going to make a difference to people at the end of life. And I was the same. I was blurring the boundaries, you know, I was working such long hours, and I had so much in my head. I'd wake up in the middle of the night thinking, oh, did I send the meeting minutes for that? Oh, did I tell such and such? And I'd have to have a notebook next to the bed. I think, oh, I'll be fine, I'll have a notebook. Thinking, if you're waking up in the middle of the night with those sort of things, there's something that needs to change. And I remember I went on a holiday. I think my daughter was probably about 15 or 16 at the time. I was obviously still with my ex, and I went on a holiday. And within 2 days, I had a really bad flu, and I was in bed then for like 3 days. It was a question of, my body was like, "You're not doing anything now. I'm going to force you to stop and rest," you know. And I physically couldn't get out of bed. I was so ill. And I was thinking, I haven't been ill for years. I'm usually really well. You think, no, you've gone on holiday. You're in France, and it's you know, your body's telling you. So absolutely, it's a question of, you know, listening to that. And I went back and spoke to my managers afterwards, and one of the directors was actually brilliant, and he said, well, let's get you an admin, let's get somebody in to take all of that stuff out of your head that you're waking up in the middle of the night and making notes about. But yeah, we feel as women, again, it comes to kind of our conditioning, we feel as women that if we're asking for help, that we're failing, you know, there's something wrong. And it's not, it's a sign of strength if you recognize, actually, this is as much as I can do, and it's much as, you know, I can healthily and safely do, so therefore something has to give, and it's not going to be me, it's going to be, you know, my admin or something else. Such a difficult thing to have, though, a decision to make.
It's about balance, isn't it? It's about balancing everything, you know, work life, home life, what we're prepared to do, what we're not prepared to do as well, what we're not prepared to put up with. And it's all part of who we are and how we kind of bumble along, isn't it? But let's hope that your wisdom is shared with your clients as openly as it possibly can be, so they can then go on to share with other people. And it's the stories, isn't it? The stories, like from your experience about the nativity. You got me thinking as you were talking about that. I don't think I was ever in the nativity. I never did the dancing, acting, singing, malarkey. I was in the choir, I think, for a while, but I was always kind of, I never fitted in. And on day one, I remember going to school down the alleyway. My mum was dragging me to school, physically dragging me to school. And in those days we had satchels. So, you know, satchel that goes around, you know, a bag.
Yeah.
And I remember when I got there to the school, I flung it around my head, and I hit the head teacher. So that was that was my first day at school. And then it continued. And when I was 16, I just didn't go to school one day. I'd had enough of it, you know, all this silly nonsense. And there we go. So yeah, so again, that's why I've developed my own DISC model, because the behavioural profiling, if we know sooner rather than later what our behaviours are, then we can know ourselves earlier, then we can hit the ground running and be a lot more successful a lot sooner, or kinder, or more understanding with other people who are different to us or whatever. And I think the kind of balance has gone a bit wrong now, because there's all this talk about stress, which is good that we're talking about it, and mental health and so on, but I think it's gone too far the other way. You know, you can't say anything these days about you know, well, you know, I get sent loads and loads of jokes, and every now and then there'll be a flurry of those that I can share, and most of them are from my mum's friends who are in their 80s and 90s, and some of them are most crude and awful, racist, this, that, and the other. I can't possibly share them, you know, in this society, but that's the society they grew up in. and that society I was a child in. So things have changed considerably over the years, and I do think the balance is out of kilter now. I mean, we never had coaches. I mean, thank goodness we do now. But you know, coaches. What we know, what's a coach? We had mentors. We had apprenticeships. So the people who guided the apprentices, what do you call it? People who do the
Apprentices.
apprentices, yeah. So they were mentors. I mean, they didn't know they were mentors, but that's our modern word for it, you know. So cultures, society, the whole bit has changed, and we still need to have the balance. Doesn't matter who we are, how old we are, what we do, what our industry sector is, whatever. It's about being kind to each other and valuing our differences and celebrating and loving one another and all that good stuff.
Yeah, definitely.
Been lovely speaking with you, Jackie, again. What would be your top tip for somebody who perhaps is being invited to step up into a leadership role? Maybe they're not there now, but they're about to be going into a leadership role, or perhaps they've recently taken on a leadership role. What would be your guidance to them?
Well, recognise that you might need to ask for help and ask for help, but also definitely very much kind of treat it like a journey. You know, this is part of you're going to learn skills and through that, so treat it like a journey. You know, it's the job's never done of life, is it? You know, everything adds to it. Everything that you have that happens is learning. You know, whether it's you kind of make a big mistake or whether you do something really great, you know, everything is learning. And if you get the opportunity to kind of learn about yourself, then do that. I mean, one of the things that I'm getting ready to launch now is around a program around leadership styles, you know, finding your own leadership style, particularly as a woman. So often leadership, we're put into situations where we're not taught how to lead, and then again, you know, as we've talked about, you start to doubt yourself because you compare yourself to other great leaders, but they all started somewhere, and a lot of the styles, you know, aren't focused towards feminine. You know, they're often quite kind of autocratic or bureaucratic, which again, I don't want to slot people in boxes, you know. So I've developed a program around leadership styles that there's a lot of fluidity to it, you know, because actually on some days you want to put a different hat on to others. They're all part of who you are. And it's understanding how certain aspects of you work better in other situations, you know, and also finding out, you know, what your nativity play story was like, you know. So for me, I'm quite happy standing up and talking. That's all, you know, I've always been happy to do that, you know, and building relationships with people. So you know, when I'm kind of facilitating workshops or running training or that kind of thing, the kind of front of room stuff for me is natural, because I've been doing it since I was, you know, since I was a child. And it's finding out what those stories about are you that become your style, you know, very much similar to kind of how you develop your disc. You know, we are who we are because of what we've gone through and how we've responded to that. And the other thing is actually get to the bottom of what you're telling yourself about yourself, what did you call it, your inner monkey mind, your internal chatter, you know, those limiting beliefs that you have. Get to know what they are, and work out actually, are they really true? The things that you've started to believe, that you're not good enough, you're not clever enough, somebody else is better, is that actually really true? Really good starting point. And yeah, you know, obviously get in touch with me if you want to ask more about coaching or mentoring.
And how do people do that, Jackie? Where do they find you?
Well, I've got actually there's a freebie on my website, which is jackiebooth.co.uk, around confidence techniques. So kind of confidence techniques to help you with your leadership. So because again, it's kind of the stuff that we believe about ourselves. If it's negative, undermines our confidence. So yeah, you can pop on the website and find that.
So can you spell your name, because there's various different ways of spelling Jackie, so if you can spell out your website.
There is. Mine's very old fashioned. It's JACKIEBOOTH, so jackiebooth.co.uk.
Fantastic. Lovely spending time with you today, Jackie, and sharing your
You too, Elaine. Thank you so much for inviting me.